Welcome to the realm of intoxicating flavors and head-banging beer reviews.
Are the world's strongest beers really beer? What's up, everybody? It's the Ginger Yeti, and it's time for a discussion that's going to upset some people, and it's very controversial. So, the world's strongest beers, things like Snake Venom, which is somehow the official world's strongest beer, Beithir Fire or Beithir Fire, which is stronger than this, and some of these other beers, Armageddon, those kind of beers, super high alcohol beers. Are they really beer? I mean, this is 67.5% alcohol. This is 75% alcohol. But how are they really beer? So I've reviewed both these beers. And in the comments, I've seen a lot of people talking about how it's not beer, how it's BS, this, that. And we had a lot of good discussions. I had some private discussions with Don from Don's Beer Reviews about it. And so these beers here, they are freeze distilled. So freeze distillation, which I found out a lot of people don't understand, it's also known as fractional freezing. And it's a process which is used to separate substances with different melting points. So like water melts or freezes at a different point than alcohol. And it can be applied to fermented alcohol. And they use it to apply it to beverages like fermented alcohol to increase the alcoholic concentration by removing frozen water, but leaving behind all the alcoholic solution and the other things. The process involves cooling the beverage to a temperature below the freezing point of water, but above alcohol. And as water freezes, it can be separated from the remaining liquid, which has a higher alcohol content. And it's less effective than traditional distillation process of removing other substances in the liquid. Now, a lot of times when people hear distillation, they think moonshine or liquor or those kind of alcohols. And this is totally different. It's not a pot, it's not a still. You're not actually distilling in the traditional or the most common understanding of the term way. You're just removing the water content. Freeze distilling, it produces beverages such as Applejack from hard cider, although I've never heard of Applejack. It also produces things like ice beers. You know, ice beers used to be a big trend. A lot of breweries made ice beers, or ice beers. That's how they made ice beers. It's the same way they make icebox. They freeze distill them to make icebox. And everybody considers ice beers and icebox beer. Everybody says, yeah, it's beer. There's no argument there. It's beer. An icebox is a beer. An ice beer. I remember it was late 90s, early 2000s. Bud Ice, like all those different ice beers. There's higher alcohol beers. Everybody considered them beer. But when you start talking about these higher, crazy beers, people are like, oh, it's distilled, it's not beer. And again, with the ice distillation or the freeze distillation or the fractional freezing, it doesn't remove the impurities, and at least not as effectively as true distillation does. And it can potentially increase the impurities in the beverage. And when I say impurities, it would be like the terpenes or the different flavors of the beer, adjuncts in the beer, things like that. So it could actually intensify those flavors. An interesting thing to note is that, at least in the USA, if you're a home brewer, it's completely illegal to freeze distill any liquid, any beer, anything like that. You need to have a permit to freeze distill anything, because you could produce high alcohol beverages. And of course that's illegal because our blue alls and religion and all that nonsense we don't need to talk about. So, back to the beer. There are, in the discussion in the comments of my reviews of both these beers, I will link the reviews to both these beers down below, if you want to call them beers. Some people are bringing up things like brandy, and brandy is distilled wine, but it's truly distilled. It's not freeze distilled or fractional freezing. Cognac, same thing. I mean, cognac and brandy, which I learned is basically the same thing, but cognac can only be produced in a certain region of France, like champagne can only be produced in a certain region of France. So, these beers here, the world's strongest beers. Are they beer? Maybe. And this is the caveat, and this is the problem with these beers. And there's articles out there going back to when Armageddon was brewed. Armageddon, I don't remember. I'm not sure when that first started being brewed. I've never had it. But there's a lot of controversy about that because the original brew did hit their 65%, whatever it was. But then subsequent brews were all the way down to like 15, 16%. So it wasn't true how high the alcohol was. And these brewers, specifically the brewer that makes this, Brewmeister, and I'm sure this is the same brewery, 88, whatever. And if it's not the same brewery, it's something similar. Or somebody similar. They started playing with the beer. So when they brew these beers, they use yeasts that are very alcohol tolerant, sometimes champagne yeast, other yeast that can already produce higher alcohols than normal. I mean, I'm drinking an Affogato from Dogfish Head Worldwide Stout, brewed normally, to 15% alcohol beer. They would take yeast that can produce things like this, these higher alcohol beers, to make their base beer. And then they go through the freeze distillation or the fractional freezing to remove the water, and removing the water increases the alcohol. Just like ice beer, ice bock, whatever. At that point, yes, in my opinion, and I think most people's opinions, it's still beer. However, the companies that make these cheat. So when they make a batch of one of these, and then they test the alcohol level, if the alcohol level is too high, they add base beer to it to bring the alcohol level back down, which is fine, still beer. But if the alcohol level is too low, they add grain neutral spirit. That's where it becomes an issue. That's where it's cheating. That's where it's no longer beer. And because you don't know whether you got a batch of true beer or not, they have to list on the label grain spirit. The minute you add grain spirit, it's no longer a beer. I don't care what you say, what your argument is, it's no longer a beer. So, again, are these two, the world's strongest beers, really beer? Yes or no, it really depends. If these beers in these two bottles were truly just brewed, freeze distilled, or fractional freezing, or ice distilled to get to the alcohol level that they say they are, 75%, 67.5%, and that's the end of the story, that's it, then yeah, technically they are beer. If these two beers didn't hit that level and they had to add grain neutral spirit to make it that level, to be bragging about it being that level, then no, it is no longer beer. It's some sort of cocktail or some other nonsense. It's a bastardization, and they should not be able to call it beer. And personally, I don't know about you all out there, I'd like to know down below, but personally, the minute that you even have to put grain neutral spirit on your label, I don't think you should be able to label this as beer whatsoever or craft beer. I mean, even they say here fortified beer, which is like fortified wine, which is something else I'm not familiar with because I don't drink wine. Even fortified beer, that's like a cop-out. That's complete bullshit. So again, we don't know, because you don't know whether you're getting the true beer that's only been freeze distilled and that's it, or if you're getting some version of it that they had to add alcohol to it to bring it up to the percentage so they can sucker people like me into buying these high alcohol crazy beers for doing beer reviews. So that's my rant on this. Go check out both my reviews of these beers. The review on this beer is much better because I had TK with me and we had a great time drinking it. I don't recommend buying either of these beers unless you just want to try them for your own sake, because neither one of them is good. They're just liquor. I mean, basically they're straight liquor. That's what it tastes like. And I don't know. It was fun to try them. It's fun to talk about them. Let's have a discussion down below about what you think about both these beers. But that's my take on both these beers. It's an adventure trying these beers. But again, kind of cheating if you're adding gray neutral spirit. What's your opinion? And as always, embrace the adventure.